After the huge success of 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra, Toho needed another major hit, and the studio pushed for a fast turnaround. Taka Okawara returned to direct, Shogo Tomiyama oversaw the project, and Koichi Kawakita continued to lead the effects work. The idea was to bring back Mecha-Godzilla as a full reinvention as opposed to being a carryover of the 1974 film, with aliens and Mecha-Godzilla being the bad guy. However, it's not a sequel to the 1974 film. This can be a bit confusing for general audiences, given the 2 in the title. So no, this is not a sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. That's actually Terror of Mechagodzilla. Crazy, right? Mecha-Godzilla was chosen partially because the Heisei series had already introduced high-tech concepts with Mecha-King Ghidorah. The new robot was framed as a G-force weapon built from Ghidorah's recovered technology. The script had to keep Godzilla alive, which forced writer Wataru Mimura to move the story's moral weight onto G-force. Their decision to use BabyGodzilla as bait gave the film its tension without undermining Godzilla's role as the franchise's central figure. Essentially, you can have your cake and eat it too, with introducing BabyGodzilla, but not needing, Minya and any of the Son of Godzilla antics. The early drafts were really ambitious. They featured 2 Rodans and a different version of Mechagodzilla called Union Mechagodzilla. Scenes that explored Godzilla's parental side were removed, and budget limits and special effects workload forced a lot of these ideas out. The twin Rodans would have required 2 full suits and complex wirework. The biggest changes came from Bandai, the toy company that a lot of us know today as being the people behind SH Monster Arts, and my personal favorite, the Movie Monster series. Kawakita consulted directly with the toy designer, specifically Katsushi Murakami, who pushed for a more modular and mechanically coherent Mechagodzilla. This feedback reshaped the entire design, leading to the Garuda docking system and the Super Mechagodzilla transformation. Kenpachiro Satsuma portrayed Godzilla once again, while Wataru Fukuda handled Mechagodzilla and Hurricane Ryu performed as BabyGodzilla. Post-production brought a major milestone as this was the first Japanese feature to utilize Dolby Digital sound. Akira Ifukube returned to score the film, blending classic themes with new military cues and emotional motifs that supported the Godzilla Baby Rodan storyline. Now, if you thought my comment about the writer being forced to keep Godzilla alive was a bit weird, that's because this was supposed to be the last entry in the Heisei era. The reason being is that the Americans were going to release their own take on the character. However, due to issues with development, the film would ultimately be delayed to 1998, which allowed Toho to continue making Godzilla movies for 2 more years in the East. The film opened in Japan on December 11, 1993, and earned strong box office numbers. It made around 1 billion yen, and it sold 3.8 million tickets and grossed $36 million. Now, remember when I talked about how the now defunct streaming service Crackle was my introduction to a lot of the Godzilla movies from the 90s and the 2000s, because they were hard to find on physical media when I was a kid? Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 was one of those Crackle movies, as I like to call them. I watched this one specifically very frequently. Honestly, this might be the movie I watched the most, besides maybe Godzilla Final Wars. The main reason for this was Godzilla's abundant screen time in this movie. On top of that, I was an avid Godzilla Unleashed player, and Fire Rodan was one of my favorite characters in that game. And while not frequently brought up nowadays, Fire Rodan makes his debut here in this very movie. So, that's something. I don't know. In short, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 was one of my favorite movies as a kid. But in recent years, I've felt rather mixed on it. So, let's see where I land. Without wasting any more time, this is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. The UN builds Mecha-Godzilla using salvaged parts from Mecha-King Ghidorah after the Garuda warship proves useless against Godzilla. Meanwhile, scientists on an island discover a giant Pteranodon egg, only for Rodan to appear and battle Godzilla. Godzilla defeats Rodan and follows the egg to Japan, where it hatches into BabyGodzilla, not a Pteranodon. Drawn by the infant, Godzilla attacks Kyoto, forcing G-Force to deploy Mecha-Godzilla. The machine fails, so engineers combine it with the Garuda to form Super Mechagodzilla. Rodan comes back, this time as Fire Rodan, and fights Mecha-Godzilla and dies. His energy revives Godzilla, who destroys Super Mechagodzilla with his new red spiral beam. Godzilla then claims BabyGodzilla and leads him into the ocean. 5 films into the Heisei era, Toho is fully locked into a system that clearly works for them. This is the 3rd annual entry in a row, and you can feel how comfortable the studio has become with this production rhythm. That rhythm comes with trade-offs. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 can feel very formulaic, and the structure follows a pattern the franchise had already perfected by the early 90s. With 20 films behind it, repetition is inevitable. The film still finds ways to stand out, though. The script is one of the tightest in the entire series. Scenes move with purpose, yet the movie still allows room for quiet character beats that give the story some warmth. The emotional core of the film, of course, is BabyGodzilla, and the movie commits fully to making that connection work.
He's gone away.
The design is cute without drifting away from what Godzilla should look like, and the performers around the creature sell the bond convincingly. In my opinion, this is one of the more successful BabyGodzilla incarnations on screen. It never reaches the exaggerated look of Little Godzilla, but it carries an appeal that feels very overlooked today. Canon apparently agreed, since they used this version of BabyGodzilla as a mascot for their Belpia photocopiers. I think the human storyline really works here for one simple creative choice. People actually pilot Mechagodzilla this time. The Showa incarnation was always remote controlled, usually from a laboratory far away. Here, characters step inside the machine and share the battlefield with Godzilla. That really grounds the action, and it gives the cast a more engaging role in the conflict. Even though I still think the Showa Mechagodzilla duology has far more personality and flair, this version benefits from a more involved human perspective. The editing style gives the movie a strange but entertaining identity. It reminds me of Rocky IV with its reliance on montage. This film swaps out Survivor for Akira Ifukube's score, but the overall rhythm leans into a pseudo MTV sensibility that feels glued to 1993. I enjoy that aesthetic, although the pacing can drag when the film slips into extended montage territory to deliver basic story information. Even then, Ifukube's music carries those sequences, so I don't mind one bit. His themes elevate shots that would have felt flat in lesser hands, and the score gives the film a stronger emotional through line than the visuals alone could manage. While I love the human storyline, I think the scale is very inconsistent in this movie. Scale is a major pillar of kaiju filmmaking because it determines whether the audience believes they're watching colossal monsters or people in suits on miniature sets. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 opens with a perfect example of how to do this well. The reveal of Mecha-King Ghidorah's severed head sitting in a warehouse immediately sets the tone. It feels massive and ominous and loaded with consequence. The moment the characters declare that humanity now has a robot capable of killing Godzilla is so badass.
At last, we have it now. A robot to kill Godzilla.
Yes! Rock and load! Rock and load! Bring on the pain!
The early Mechagodzilla construction scenes continue this strong approach. Shots of the machine surrounded by scaffolding, engineers, and walkways create a clear sense of scale. The use of foreground human figures reinforces that Mechagodzilla is gigantic. It sells the effect. This technique actually mirrors the visual language used in 1974's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, where Toho often framed their machinery through workers, platforms, and practical sets to define the size of the monster. Okay, that's all well and good, but the problem arrives once the monsters actually start fighting. The visual geography just falls apart. In basic filmmaking terms, fight scenes rely on spatial clarity. The viewer needs to understand where each character is in a set location, how close they are to each other, and how their movements affect the space. When those rules break, scale collapses. Shots alternate between wide angles, tight close-ups, and mid-range inserts without consistent visual anchors, which makes Mechagodzilla and Godzilla feel smaller, and it flattens the entire environment. This breaks the illusion, and it makes the effects look cheaper than they really are. Another issue is the heavy reliance on beam attacks. The Heisei era often leaned on them, but this film overuses them to the point of obnoxious repetition. Long-distance beam exchanges remove any physicality from the fights. Godzilla and Mechagodzilla rarely engage each other directly, and when they do, the fights end quickly because Godzilla just dominates in close quarters. This creates a rhythm where the battles stall instead of escalate. The tension never builds and the sequence becomes static. It's just two monsters just bzz, 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 and that's it. You don't get anything interesting. Godzilla himself is handled well, his design is bulky and imposing, and the decision to frame him as a villain gives the story clearer stakes. He has played many roles across the franchise, but there is something refreshing about seeing him occupy the antagonist slot yet again.
This baby is something else.
BabyGodzilla adds welcome dimension to this portrayal. It gives Godzilla a motive that pushes him directly towards the human cast, and that connection creates real danger, since it's Godzilla. His instinct to protect his offspring forces him into conflict, and that tension gives the film a sharper edge than, say, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, where his morality is a tiny bit more ambiguous. Rodan's presence is another major element. His introduction is atmospheric, with fog, distance, and scale doing a lot of heavy lifting. The shot of him emerging through mist, paired with Ifukube's score, is one of the strongest early moments in the film. The issue comes from how the character is executed afterward. The design is very stiff, the puppet movement is limited, and the constant reliance on flight makes him feel more like a generic Pteranodon than a creature with actual personality. A strong Rodan characterization needs to switch between grounded movement and aerial combat to feel like a real animal. Look to Final Wars if you want that. Without that balance, I think the performance can become very static, and it's very static here. The fight between Rodan and Godzilla is a low point. The extreme close-ups obscure the action, making it nearly impossible to read what is happening. I can't help but think of the awkwardness of the giant condor fight from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, but without the charm. Yes, I really went there. The compositing also really struggles. Rodan looks like a flat model pasted onto a screen, and the shots lack any real depth. Now look, I get what you're saying. You're being too mean. You know, like they did the best they could with the effects that they had. No. Look at Gamera Guardian of the Universe, which came out only 2 years later with a much smaller budget. It delivered far more dynamic aerial versus ground combat. The contrast highlights just how limited Rodan's sequences are here. The brief scene where Rodan attacks Disney World is fun on paper, but the execution just sucks. He just kind of flies over and roars, and that's it. Think about how cool it'd be if he actually attacked Disney World and like blew up a model of Space Mountain. That'd be awesome. Nothing ever feels tangible or real, and a lot of that's just because the compositing is so rough. These shortcomings add to the sense that the film's scale work fluctuates wildly from scene to scene. When the movie gets it right, it creates some of the most striking imagery of the Heisei era. When it falters, the illusion collapses and the viewer is pulled out of the moment. Now it's time to talk about Mechagodzilla 2, because this version leaves me with a lot of mixed feelings. Out of the three major interpretations, we're not talking about the MonsterVerse or the anime one, the real three, unks no. If you look at just those major three ones, Showa, Heisei, and Kiryu, this is the one that lands at the very bottom for me. The design leans heavily into a rounded, almost soft look that never communicates the intimidation that a Mechagodzilla design needs. I understand that a lot of people like this suit, and I get the nostalgia behind it, but when you directly compare it to the angular menace of the Showa Mechagodzilla or the redefined militaristic edge of Kiryu, this version loses impact. The shoulder cannons are a nice idea, but the way that they're integrated feels more ornamental than functional. Even then, Kiryu eventually proves how striking and aggressive that design element can be. With this suit, the cannons feel more like accessories than defining features. The mechanical detailing also lacks a sense of hardness. Mechagodzilla should feel engineered for destruction, and this version often reads as a bulky toy with rounded contours instead of a weapon built by a military task force. The unused concepts hint at a more interesting direction. Early designs featuring colored armor, with them being green or red or orange, would have given this Mechagodzilla a distinct identity. A bolder palette could have separated it from the standard metallic silver and made it feel like a purpose-built machine as opposed to just a generic robot that vaguely resembles Godzilla. Other concept sketches explored a more Transformer-like build, with layered plates and shifting components, and I think those ideas suggest a version of Mechagodzilla with much more personality and engineering logic, something that reflects the G-Force team that constructed it. Even if the design underwhelms, the narrative role does work for the most part. This is the first film where humans step inside Mechagodzilla and pilot it directly, and I think that story works really well. Whenever Mechagodzilla goes into battle, you can feel the tension because the pilots are actively participating in the fight as opposed to just observing it from a safe bunker. So even if the suit itself lacks the visual presence of its predecessors, the story works tenfold.
Prepare G-Crusher. Roger.
One world-building detail that I genuinely appreciate is the public's uneasy relationship with G-Force. The film hints that people don't fully trust this organization through lines of dialogue, and those moments give the story a sense of political texture.
G-Force, did you say? I don't trust you guys one little bit.
Any government-backed military initiative would naturally draw criticism or suspicion, especially one building weapons that could level entire cities. The movie touches on this idea through a few lines of dialogue and brief interactions, and those glimpses suggest a more complicated relationship between civilians and the people developing Godzilla-killing weapons. There are points where G-Force's behavior even comes across as secretive, but the film never leans into the potential ethical issues behind harvesting cybernetic parts from Mecha-King Ghidorah, or the consequences of building mechanized weapons on a global scale. In fact, we get this sort of ethical quandary with taking bits from King Ghidorah in Godzilla vs. Kong. In fact, I'd say that movie does that kind of storyline much better here. I wouldn't even call it a storyline here, they barely even bring it up again, but come on, give me a story centered on public distrust or moral oversight. It could have taken the movie in a much more layered direction with so much more substance to it. I also think that that angle could have grounded the fantasy elements in a way that mirrors how real governments justify or hide the development of powerful technology. The film gestures towards these ideas, but it doesn't spend the time needed to explore and develop them. And don't get me wrong, I totally understand why this is a fast-paced entry in a commercial franchise with a one-year production cycle. You have limited time to tell a complete story, and the priority clearly went to delivering an accessible plot with strong character work and reliable spectacle. Still, the seeds for something richer are planted throughout the film, and a deeper look at the political side of G-Force would have strengthened the world building around the action.
The time has come, finally, to put our technology to the final test.
Despite those missed opportunities, though, the film does deliver on what it sets out to do. It builds a functional story, it gives the human cast more involvement through Mechagodzilla, and it balances all of that with the series' trademark monster spectacle. Even with uneven scale, awkward fights, and a Mechagodzilla design that never reaches its full potential, the film does have a clear, if bland, identity. It's confident, it's fast-moving, and structured around the ideas that the filmmakers know how to execute. The end result is a movie that may not push the Heisei era into new territory, but remains a memorable entry with its own strengths and its own personality. With all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. This is just one small part of my massive Godzilla retrospective project where I revisit and review every single Godzilla movie and TV show. Huge thank you to our channel members for supporting the channel. Your names are listed right up here on screen. For $1.99 a month, you can get early access to all my videos, plus exclusive members-only content, and even see your name featured in the credits of our original films and videos just like this. It's an easy way to keep these retrospectives and short films going, but whether you join or not, I appreciate you watching. I just put out a brand new short film called Shadows. Go and check it out. I'll have it right up here on screen. It's only 2 minutes long. I think you'll dig it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.